And of course, now the man himself, Ben Shapiro, can help us break down everything that's gone down this week. So, Ben, we'll get to Kamala Harris. But first, I want your reaction to what we've seen in Chicago so far to this point.
I hate all of it. Every single bit of it. It's all terrible. I mean, here's my biggest problem, obviously. Kamala Harris has been the vice president of the United States for the last 3.5 years under Joe Biden. And apparently that never happened. It was all just a figment of our imagination. Joe Biden never existed. They had him come out and yell at the moon, and then they shipped him off to California. They made sure that he didn't speak in prime time, and he has not been seen since. Apparently, he's the still sitting president, but we really have no idea, to be honest. And then, ever since then, we have just been treated to speaker after speaker explaining that Kamala is just joy. She's just vibes, man. And she dances and she cooks. And then they bring out Tim Walz. And Tim Walz, it turns out, is also vibes. He's kind of weird, goofy sitcom dad vibes, but he's vibes too. And apparently none of these people have ever held higher office. None of these people ever have had an agenda. None of them actually have any policies. The only thing that we know about Kamala Harris is that Kamala Harris once worked at a McDonald's. And also, apparently, she was a hard-charging, tough-on-the-border DA who wants to lower your taxes, which is super weird since I remember this person named Kamala Harris, and she's been the VP for like 3.5 years, and she was a senator before that, and then she was Attorney General of California before that. But apparently her career actually ended in like 2006 in California, and now she's just running for president. Never heard of this lady before. And then when you get to Tim Walz, it's as though his career stopped when he was an assistant volunteer coach at a high school somewhere back in the mid-90s. And since then, he's been, a multiple-term congressperson and a 2-term governor of the state of Minnesota, where he was totally tyrannical when he wasn't just letting the state burn itself down over BLM. But none of that ever happened. I mean, it's super weird. If you feel like you're being gaslit, it's because you are. It's because you are. And the media are so complicit in all of this. It's time for me to bring out my calendar. Here it is. We are on day 33 of Kamala Harris not being asked any questions after cooing out the actual nominee and then providing zero policy answers. 33 days of the media not caring at all because they're at the tail end of the human centipede that is the Democratic Party media complex.
So, Ben, there seems to be a clear reason that they're not trotting her out in front of the media because she is appearing to gain ground in the polls. Do you believe those polls that show her up by around 3 points nationally? Just how close do you think this race actually is right now?
So the good news for Trump is that despite a month of nonstop sycophantic drool cup carrying coverage from the media, she is up only slightly. Like, with this kind of coverage, she should be up 10. There's no question that she should be up heavily against Trump, given the fact that the last month has been spent just waxing poetic about what a wonderful human being Kamala Harris is, what a charming, insanely charismatic person she is. I mean, listen, all of us remember because we follow politics closely, but most people don't even remember her actual presidential run in 2019, 2020, because it was both short-lived and awful. And then it was kind of in the past and nobody followed it. You really have to be kind of a political junkie to follow the primaries closely enough to pay attention to the candidates who never even make it to the actual voting in the primaries, let alone the general election. Then as vice president, she was kind of shuffled off to the back room where they pretended she had a job and she played solitaire all day. And so now the sort of reintroduction of Kamala Harris with this sort of heavy gloss of celebrity on her, you would imagine that should boost her in the polls, 10, 15 points, actually. And what it's actually boosted her is to about where Joe Biden was, at least in that range, before he completely collapsed in that debate with Donald Trump and effectively died on the stage. And so, yes, I believe the polls that she is up maybe anywhere from 1 to 3 points, maybe at the outside 4 points. The swing states are all unbelievably close, like super close. We have 7 states that are within margin of error. And so what that means is that despite all of these attempts, the American people still are not sold on Kamala Harris. And it seems to me that what we should be seeing right now is her high watermark. It is hard to think of her going up from here, absent some sort of serious blunder by President Trump. At a certain point, you would imagine there's still some 80-some days left until the election. At some point, she will have to come back to earth. It's going to be Trump's job in the debates to make sure that she actually answers for her record. But it is unbelievable. It's absolutely incredible how the media and Harris have been able to transform her candidacy from a continuation of the man she serves under currently, like right now, she's the sitting VP, into a fight against an incumbent Donald Trump. It's as though the last 3.5 years absolutely don't exist. She's slated to speak tonight. And what they are telling us is that when she speaks tonight, her thematics are going to be about how our nation now has a fleeting opportunity to move past bitterness, cynicism, and divisive battles of the past and a chance to chart a new way forward. What new way forward? You're the sitting vice president. That's not a new way forward. Normally, the message is don't change horses in the middle of the stream. Her message instead, because everyone wants to change horses in the middle of the stream, is the stream doesn't exist. The horse doesn't exist. In fact, we're living in 2020, And Joe Biden never existed. And so we're brigadooning this thing. We're just going to pluck it out of the mist and pretend none of this ever existed. So do I believe she's up? That was a long answer. Do I believe that she's up slightly? Yes, I believe she's up slightly. So I think that definitely lasts. I definitely do not.
And hey, Ben, it's Natalie Winters here. I guess my question for you, you would expect DNC, RNC would give to the respective party a boon in the polls, right? You'd see at least sort of a short uptick. But you haven't really seen that, right? It's sort of an interesting reversal in that trend. If anything, you've seen Donald Trump continue to gain ground, not just in swing states. How do you think that sort of shakes out coming off the heels of the DNC? But more importantly, if RFK Jr. comes out tomorrow and endorses the Trump campaign, will that not take basically all of the air, if there is any air, that the DNC gave to the Harris campaign to begin with?
Well, I think the DNC is much more of a continuation of the last 3 weeks than it is anything new. So normally in a political cycle, nobody pays attention until you actually get to the conventions. But because everybody knew both of the candidates for so long in Trump and Biden, everyone already had their opinions baked in by the time the RNC happened. So there was no real bump there for President Trump. And everybody knew what was going to happen at the DNC, except that they cooed him out and they put in Kamala Harris. And all the warm feelings that accrued to Kamala Harris, that happened instantaneously. I mean, that was right then. It was not as though it took a while for that warm feeling to sort of suffuse the Harris campaign. Literally the moment they took Joe Biden out back and shot him like Old Yeller, at that point, all of the warm feelings simply glommed onto Kamala Harris, and suddenly, she was spiking in the polls, and she's basically been gaining a little bit, fading a little bit. I wouldn't expect to see any big bump out of the DNC, despite all of the warm coverage, because, again, she's been getting nothing but sycophantic, drooling media coverage since the day that she became the nominee without ever earning a single primary vote in her entire life. So RFK Jr. coming forward and endorsing Trump. So the math suggests that right now, nationally speaking, he's polling at about 4%, somewhere between 4 and 5%. And the breakdown in that 4 or 5% is that it used to be 12% or 10%. Everybody who was going to vote for RFK because they did not like Joe Biden went back to Kamala Harris, which suggests that the vast bulk of the people who are currently saying they'll vote for RFK are warm toward Donald Trump. That is what Amy Walter at Cook Political is suggesting. She suggests that by about a 2-to-1 margin, the RFK vote favors Trump right now. So if he moves over to Trump, many of those people are likely to move into Trump's category. You're talking about slim percentages, but again, you're talking about margin of error in many of these states. So if you switch 1 percentage point in Wisconsin or Pennsylvania or Michigan or Georgia or North Carolina or Nevada or Arizona, that could be enough to shape the election.
So, Ben, I'm interested then on your take on if Trump should cut a deal. Like, it seems like RFK is going to drop out. He is going to endorse Trump. If there was a deal in place where that endorsement is coming with a promise of a cabinet position, do you think that's a good trade for the Trump campaign?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think that at this point, it's a close enough election that you got to pull out all the stops. And if Trump were to leave that on the table, I think that would be a mistake. In fact, I think, again, that so much of what President Trump did at the RNC was about his belief that the election was effectively already won against Joe Biden, that this is sort of how I view the J.D. Vance pick as VP. I like J.D. Vance. I think J.D. Vance is a brilliant guy. I mean, there's just no question about that. With that said, J.D. Vance did not win Trump a whole hell of a lot of additional votes. He actually outpolled J.D. Vance in his home state of Ohio. It's not as though J.D. Vance is bringing along huge swaths of people in Michigan, Pennsylvania, or Wisconsin. And so that was really more about legacy, or it was more about him believing that J.D. Vance is a good attack dog. And so he sort of forewent candidates who theoretically could have brought some swing voters, people like Glenn Youngkin, for example, in favor of J.D. Vance. I don't think that he can afford to miss more opportunities like that. And so if there is the opportunity to bring RFK Jr. on board, even if that means giving RFK Jr. EPA or something, then I think that Trump will and should do it.
I'm curious too, Ben, when we say the DNC, we're obviously talking about what's going on inside the walls, inside the barricades, even though those don't work. But so much has happened outside too, right? And I think the Democrats are trying to draw a distinction, say we're not, cut from the same cloth. But in reality, like you were alluding to, the gaslighting that we've seen going on, I would argue that what's going on inside the convention is just as radical as what's going on outside. They're just hiding it. They're just masking it a little better. But how do you sort of square what's going on outside the convention with the radical policies being pushed inside?
I mean, you're totally right. I mean, I'm looking at the lower hand of the screen, and what I'm seeing are a wave of American flags. When's the last time that you went to a rally filled with Democrats and it was filled with American flags? The answer is pretty much never. In fact, you're much more likely to spot Democrats in a crowd that's burning an American flag than in a crowd that is flying American flags at, say, a 4th of July parade. But inside the convention hall, it's all rah-rah USA, cheering for American hostages being held by Hamas. Like, we know that that's not what the Democratic Party is about, which is why all the Jewish groups inside the DNC have been put in unspecified locations so the pro-Hamasniks don't actually assault them on the premises. It's pretty obvious that this is the case given the fact that Joe Biden himself went out of his way to say that the protesters have a point. I wouldn't be surprised if Kamala Harris tries to pat those people on the head tonight, given the fact that some of those people are very angry with her for the DNC even paying homage to the American hostages who are currently being held by Hamas in the Gaza Strip. So, yes, I mean, the entire game of the DNC is to prevent anyone from understanding what their policy looks like. The only things you have heard from the DNC in terms of policy, realistically speaking, lots about abortion. Really, really big into abortion. They love the abortion. The abortion is huge. They're performing them out in the parking lot. That's not even a joke. That's reality. They had an 18-foot high inflatable IUD, which is the weirdest idolatry I've ever heard of. Those are the kinds of things that actually mean a lot to the Democrats in terms of policy. And we know they hate Project 2025, which Donald Trump himself has dissociated from. So that's all you have. If you go to Kamala Harris's website, there are literally no policy positions, but there is the entirety of Project 2025. So again, this entire convention is about lying to the American people, lying over and over and over. If you listen to the DNC, what you would believe is that Bill Clinton is just a good old boy from Arkansas who is not endorsing the radical left and also does not have a checkered history with women. You would believe that Hillary Clinton is a moderate who tried to unify the country rather than somebody who called half the country deplorables. You would believe that Barack Obama was a uniter, not a divider along polarizing racial lines. You would believe that Michelle Obama is a signal unifying figure, an Oprah-like figure, rather than the radical she is on race and politics, and which she basically could not even hold back during her speech. So it's just lies and lies and more lies. It's why I think that if you have a semblance of interest in politics or you care about policy at all, you can't help but feel irritated by this whole thing. Because they're peeing on your leg and telling you not only that it's raining, but that you have to dance in the rain, which is what they're doing literally right now.
Ben, the theme of this week is freedom, or as Kamala Harris famously says, freedom, as a young girl marching. What do you make of that being the center of their messaging?
Well, again, I think that the bargain that the Democratic Party is basically asking Americans to cut is pretty simple. They get to control every aspect of your life, but you can have consequence-free sex with whomever you want. That's basically the bargain. That is why abortion is so high on their list of priorities. It's why they keep talking about some phantom threat that Republicans are going to like come in your bedroom and stop you from sleeping with whoever you please, as though that's like Donald Trump's top of the agenda item, as though that is in the Republican National Committee playbook or platform or something like that. That is the promise. The reality, of course, is that they don't believe in economic freedom. They don't believe in the freedom of our allies. They certainly don't believe in military strength. They don't believe in your freedom from government. They believe that if you have a child and the child it goes to a public school and is gender confused by a teacher, and you disagree with the transitioning of the child should be removed from your home and become a ward of the state as their transition. I mean, it's literally Tim Walz's position in Minnesota. Does that sound like freedom to you? Does locking people down for COVID sound like freedom to you, or letting them burn cities sound like freedom? But that is what they mean. What they mean by freedom in the end is that if you are socially conservative, you must be one of those tyrannical people who doesn't want to let the children dance and also wants to like peek through somebody's keyhole while they're having sex in their bedroom, right? That's kind of, I mean, Tim Walz basically said that last night. And that's the only kind of freedom that they seem to actually care about is sexual license. That's pretty much the only I'm having this I'm struggling to figure out what they mean by freedom other than that, or the perverse form of sort of philosophically corrupt freedom pushed by the left, that freedom really means putting your hand in somebody else's pocket and then making your way off the back of their money. And if that fails, then you put your hand deeper in somebody else's pocket. Socialism is a form of neighborliness, of course.
At least the protesters outside, I think, have the nerve to admit that they don't even care about freedom. They want to deprive you of basically all your rights. But I'm curious, Rolling Stone had a piece out a few days ago saying that, because the Harris-Walz campaign has put out camo hats, rural and southern voters are now going to come running back to the Democratic Party. Look at us. We get you. We embrace you. Sort of in tune with the embracing freedom. I didn't know that was a value Democrats held. Yeah. But even just this gaslighting that you were talking about, the pivot to, liking American flags instead of burning them. Do you think that plays? Do you think that checks with voters, or do you think people can see through it?
I don't think so. And I think that one thing that's becoming very clear about this convention is that it is programmed toward the traditional Democratic base since 2012, which is a highly concentrated segment of minority voters, as well as upper-class white liberal women. That is what the Democratic Party has become. They keep doubling down to that base. Have you seen anything on the stage that appeals to, say, rural white voters without a college degree? I've seen nothing remotely like that. It just doesn't exist. And bringing up Beyonce, by the way, is not going to exactly reach out to that crowd either. It's fascinating to see. I mean, the media are, of course, all members of this contingent. I mean, the media are, of course, members of upper-class liberal enclaves in New York and D.C. and Los Angeles. And so they resonate very much to this. But I do wonder whether the guy who's living in rural Michigan is looking at this and saying to himself, hold up, I'm paying like 30% more for my groceries over the course of the last 4 years, and I'm supposed to believe that Kamala Harris is joy? And that I got locked down for COVID. I'm supposed to believe that Tim Walz is freedom? I don't know that they can sustain this level of gaslighting for this. Maybe they can. And if they can, then the American people, democracy is the theory that the American people get what they want, good and hard. So, if this is what they choose, then I suppose this is what they choose. But it's all right out there in the open for people to see if they wish to see it.
There did seem to be one moment where Tim Walz was trying to make a play to what he called the real hillbillies, when he was saying, J.D. Vance went to Yale, and, that's not like any hillbilly I know. What do you think it says about the Democratic Party where that is a punchline now, to say, yeah, this guy grew up poor and in a family of addiction, and he went on to one of the best schools in the country, and that's a punchline now? What does that tell us about the Democrats?
Well, I mean, it betrays exactly what they think of people who are rural white voters without a college degree, which is apparently they have no life aspirations. Apparently, it's very bad. If somebody from your town goes to Yale, you ought to scorn them, instead of saying, wow, that's kind of amazing that this person was able to escape poverty and then make something of themselves by going to Yale Law School and becoming a vice presidential candidate. Instead, that's supposed to be bad. And I'm confused as to why that is. Also, the abject hypocrisy of Tim Walz saying that on a stage, flanked by people who are all graduates of Ivy League schools, except for Kamala Harris, weirdly enough. But Hillary Clinton is a graduate of Yale Law School, rather. Bill Clinton's a graduate of Yale Law School. Barack Obama's a graduate of Harvard Law School. Michelle Obama's a graduate of Harvard Law School. Like, these are all Ivy League people. And for Tim Walz to be out there being like, well, yeah, we think the Ivy Leagues are bad. You own the Ivy Leagues, my friend. You're the ones who are catering to all the Hamasniks who are setting up encampments on the Ivy League campuses while promoting terrorism. So I don't think that washes. And again, I think this kind of sneering down the nose at people who are supposed hillbillies by saying, well, they're hillbillies. They don't even understand what a college is. So you and your fancy college learning, you scorn J.D. Vance understands these so-called hillbillies way the hell better than a socialist like Tim Walz does, who spends years at a time in China. That's a weird thing. I feel like that doesn't really connect with, say, the Rust Belt machine worker living in Ohio.
And I think my favorite line from last night might have been Tim Walz saying, there were 24 high schoolers in my class. None of them went to Yale, as if that was something to brag about. But final question, Ben, just give us a preview of tonight. What should we be expecting to hear from Kamala Harris?
So much joy. Ugh, the utter levels of joy. Unparalleled joy. Just joy and joy. So much joy. You won't believe the amount of joy. It's going to be coming out your ears. Almond joy. Joy detergent. Joy everywhere. Joy from inside out. Like all the joys just springing forth from the stage. You're going to feel it. The laughter is going to be infectious, guys. She's going to laugh and the whole world will laugh with her. There'll be so much emotion, so much unity, and about this much policy. Because she will never, ever talk about her policies. It is the impossibility of this campaign for her to square the joy with the political chaos that she and her boss, who she shivved directly in the kidney, that they've brought upon the country. So expect a bunch of vague platitudes tonight about bringing the country together. I would assume that it's going to be fairly boring. I don't think it'll be particularly uplifting. I think the media will play it that way. But I think it's going to be hard for her to top the Beyonce of it. I think she's going to sort of ride that wave that is the celebrity culture that is the Democrats. I mean, you can see the chicks. They're no longer the Dixie Chicks. They're just the chicks singing. Again, like that is what the Democratic National Convention is about. It's a bunch of Hollywood with a little bit of DC attached.
All right, Ben, thank you as always for your analysis. We appreciate your time.
Thanks so much.